Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this special Broadband Breakfast video interview with broadband consultants at Michael Baker International. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and I'm joined today by Teraira Snerling and Sam Garfinkel of Michael Baker International. Tell us a little bit about Michael Baker International, which, of course, is one of the leading providers of engineering and consulting services, including geospatial design, planning, architectural, environmental, and construction program management. Teraira and Sam, what are your roles at Michael Baker International?
Well, we are broadband consultants at Michael Baker. Here at Michael Baker, we're working right now, we're focusing on the BEAD and on digital equity planning for the states. Through IIJ, most of the states have received their funding. And so we're working on creating those plans for them and helping to allocate those funds in order to help bridge this digital divide.
Let's just back up and define our terms a little bit here, okay, Teraira? So obviously we're talking about the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and that has a very significant program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or the BEAD program. And kind of nestled in with it or lumped together with it is the Digital Equity Act, or DEA component. And that is kind of a law or a bill that was gathering a lot of momentum, the Digital Equity Act, that got included in IIJA. And the reason I sometimes lump BEAD and DEA together is because the work that the state broadband officers will be doing in dispensing BEAD grants really does involve Digital Equity Act programs, does it not, Teraira and Sam?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, you're correct. Those BEAD planning and the digital equity planning actually need to be aligned in order to create a successful plan for the states.
Mm-hmm. Sam, you're also a broadband grant consultant at Michael Baker. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on the work that you're doing on the BEAD and DEA programs.
Yeah, so Drew, essentially IIJA created almost a New Deal level of federal dollar investments in this space, an historic amount. It totaled 65 billion. And we know that this is both an infrastructure problem, but also a social problem. And so that means we need various funding streams to support all of those different types of activities, and not just the ones that are geared towards deployment of new infrastructure. That's certainly a need. But there are several funding streams that have become available to states and local governments, essentially to do holistic planning to solve their local digital divides. And that means making sure that all activities are funded, not just the hardware and the CapEx.
So let's just roll back and talk a little bit about Michael Baker International. And I mentioned, of course, that you're one of the leading geospatial design, planning, architectural, environmental, and construction entities. Could you just speak a little bit, if only at a very general level, why has Michael Baker focused in on the broadband infrastructure program, the aspects of the IIJA that deal with broadband? Obviously, we're going to be talking a little bit specifically about Digital Equity Act, but just broadband in general. How does Michael Baker's historical role in infrastructure tie into broadband?
I can take this one.
Please.
Yeah, so certainly we've been embedded in the infrastructure space for 80 years and helping our federal clients reach their infrastructure goals. And this is an additional infrastructure need, but as we were saying, it's a different kind of need, and it's certainly a more involved, socially involved issue. And so Michael Baker really took it up as a mission to leverage our expertise, specifically in data collection, as you were describing the GIS capabilities, to help verify data, and begin to chip away at what we first must do, which is assessing the extent and the nature of this problem, the digital divide. So that's the first major lift, and we saw a perfect fit and an alignment with our existing expertise. And so they scaled up this side of the business to address that need.
Thanks for that answer, Sam. And obviously we're all aware that there's a lot of issues right now with broadband data collection, and that's been very much in the news, very much in the coverage that and the events that we at Broadband Breakfast have been doing. Do you have any thoughts as we kind of go from this timeline where we've been focused on maps to the next phases of the BEAD funding timeline? Teraira and Sam, could you tell us a little bit about where you see the timeline going, moving from January 2023, where we are right now, into the next several months and throughout the year? Teraira, go ahead.
Okay. So most of the states have already received their funding. So once they receive their funding, they have about 270 days after receiving that funding to complete their 5-year action plan. Again, that needs to be aligned with the digital equity plan. So those need to be running concurrently. And as those are running, they'll also have an additional 180 days after the release of updated mapping. And so once that updated mapping is presented to them, then from there, they'll be able to submit the initial proposal. And then 365 days after that, they'll be able to submit their final proposal for review. So it does take a while when you think about the timeline. That's a long span of time, but during that time, that's where all of the planning and the assessing and bringing together this plan, working with the communities and bringing everything together in order to create a cohesive plan that will actually be sustainable and last.
Could
And
I just ask let me just ask a clarifying question of Teraira, and Sam, you can kind of roll with that too. Could you just clarify the difference between the 5-year plan and the DEA plan? So states and their broadband offices were responsible for both of these, and the DEA plan was first. Is that right? Could you just speak about that, Teraira or
So there's essentially two pots of funding, and equity is a core component of both. So what we're talking about when we talk about 5-year plan, we're referring to BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment funding. And that is supposed to be the, longevity of a sustainable establishment, including infrastructure. There's also, of course, the Digital Equity Act funding that also provides things like planning and then execution funding. They're meant to marry. They're meant to be informed by each other. The infrastructure that we're building has to be built in an equitable manner. So it really starts at the base. Equity is a core component for all of the things I've just described. And so it's kind of human-centered design, thinking about making machines that are usable to people. So
it's a great way to put it, because we really are talking about making sure that not just infrastructure, but the tools and the human knowledge is there to take advantage of it. I'd love to get into a little bit more about your own backgrounds, which obviously are very exciting and intriguing, and I think very complementary to this program. Sam Garfinkel, tell us just a little bit about your experience in broadband planning and what brought you to the work you're currently doing at Michael Baker International.
Yeah, for sure. I entered the broadband space in essentially the heat of the pandemic, early 2020. And I joined a local organization, a nonprofit. At the time, it was called MetaMesh Wireless Communities. And essentially, they had a tall order. They wanted to build a full-scale WISP, which is a wireless internet service provider, as a nonprofit, which is, some folks might say, is an oxymoron, but the purpose of our entity was to create better price equity by deploying inexpensive networks with moderate speeds to high need communities. And we would leverage other funding so that the end user did not have to pay. And this is good for communities where the key barrier to access is monetary. But we were also bringing connectivity that didn't exist before. So it's addressing both that monetary barrier and also that access infrastructure barrier. And so it's very similar to what the federal government ultimately decided to do with the Affordable Connectivity Program, that direct-to-consumer rebate, basically putting the money where it's needed so that folks are not saddled with additional undue financial burden just to connect to the internet.
Awesome. Great experience. And as we spoke about before, I heard about this some years ago, and was really excited to learn about the work you're doing at Michael Baker. Teraira, tell us a little bit about your background in New Orleans and how you've kind of built that or brought that into what you're doing in the digital equity front with Michael Baker.
Okay. At the City of New Orleans, I actually served as the Digital Equity Program Manager. There, I oversaw 9 equity programs. One of those was being the Broadband Infrastructure Project Manager. In that, it was a project to pull fiber and to bring 5G and to stand up those public networks in the City of New Orleans. City of New Orleans being a tourist city, also needed smart city initiatives. So I worked on a project to bring smart city initiatives like smart lighting, water sensors in the ground, kiosk in the city, those different types of smart initiatives and projects that I kind of worked on there in New Orleans. But some of the more prominent digital equity projects I worked on was bringing a computer donation program to the city, creating a contract between nonprofits and a local vendor in order to give out over 400 laptops to the youth in the city of New Orleans. Also creating a computer repair program where we utilized other nonprofits and use those resources to educate the city with digital literacy programs, and working on a project to stand up public Wi-Fi at the community centers in the city of New Orleans. I like to bring that broadband infrastructure project management knowledge as well as those digital equity skills over to Michael Baker. So I've been using those in the realm of helping to create these digital equity programs and working on the 5-year action plans as well.
Mm-hmm. How does Michael Baker work to kind of glue or knit these different aspects together? In other words, are there reasons why factors besides just profitability are part of the work that you're doing in digital equity?
Absolutely. Michael Baker has been uplifting communities through its infrastructure deployments. And this is one that I think we really hold close. I think all of us independently, we're coming from different disciplines. We are not purely engineers. We're not purely money men. We're coming from community. We're still very active in our local communities. I get to sit on the board of that other organization I mentioned, and I also chair a local digital inclusion coalition here in Salt Lake City, where I live now. We are invested in this personally and professionally. And that level of sensitivity is not always found in large engineering firms,
Right.
where focused on building bridges, building roads. It's important work. But this is a new arena. And I applaud Michael Baker for hiring folks who are diverse in their disciplines and educated from lived experience, not just reading about it academically.
Let's drill into digital equity and digital inclusion. What do those mean specifically in the communities in which you're working? Sam, you go first.
I think that it will mean something different to everybody. And that's the harder answer to give. What that means is we need to listen more closely and be asking not just check yes or no, do you need this service? What do you want to accomplish with this new service? What are the things that you feel are barriers to your education, your economic mobility? All of these things are elements associated with broadband that can be mitigated with broadband interventions. So the key is not to generalize and say, these types of communities need these types of solutions. You have to ask those questions directly with each specific community you're working with. And then they'll tell you exactly what they see as their need when it comes to digital equity.
Tiara, what are your thoughts on this?
I would just echo Sam, and I would definitely say that digital divide just exists in these communities because they're lacking those services and the access that they desperately need. I think getting down with the community, understanding what their needs are, understanding what it takes to bridge that gap, bring about equity. When I think about equity, I think about everybody having a seat at the table. That's irregardless of race, income level, or any other type of background factor. In fact, when I think of equity, I love to think of having this digital access as essential as a utility would be. It's just like water. It's just like electricity. It's so essential, just not only in the digital realm, but just also social and, economically. It's just so needed, and it needs to be viewed as such. And so when I think about the work we're doing at Michael Baker, I think we're touching every aspect of people's lives. It's not just the infrastructure and we put up this structure and there is access. There's so much more.
Right.
And when I think about it being so much more, I do think about digital equity wheel, as we refer to it, where everything is interconnected. So it's not just access, it's more than access. Can you afford that access?
Right.
Do you have a laptop or a smartphone to connect with that? If something happens to it, can it be repaired? What about digital literacy? How do we teach people how to use the internet? How do we teach them how to apply for benefits, to apply for jobs? How do we increase workforce development and those types of programs? Like, how do we do that? I think all of that is a part of digital equity. And I think Michael Baker is adequately addressing those issues.
Are there any examples of this definition of digital inclusion and digital equity that come to mind from your work in New Orleans, Tiara?
Well, when I think about the work in New Orleans, absolutely. Because there, like I said, again, being able to work with the internet providers to make sure that this internet access was affordable. I think working with those different vendors like AT&T, for example, making sure that Lifeline and those applications and that information is out and available to the community, keeping them informed about their options and being able to choose something that's reliable and affordable at the same time. I think working with them was crucial. I also think, again, working with the nonprofits to bring about those computers, working with businesses to have them donate their old computers, working with refurbishers to have them help us to clean them up and get them out into the community, working inside those community centers and being able to provide wraparound services so that people can learn, so that they can learn how to use the computer, learn how to access everything on the exact same level as other people, even though their income might not be as high, or they might not have been able to obtain this particular device prior to being given something. So I think all that work kind of works together, and it just leads into this Michael Baker work and makes it so profound, because now we're working with those states, getting down to a local level and being able to really see what the problem is, and then really pinpointing what are those solutions. And that's what we're working with the states on. How do we provide the solution to the problem? We know what the problem is, but how do we provide that solution?
Well, let's talk a few minutes just about that in particular, the strategies that you use to determine what components are most important for a digital equity program. Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
we have invested in essentially expanding and equipping our engagement team to do this lift, to prepare this lift, because what is needed to understand the issue, like we know, as Tira said, we know what the problem is, but I don't know what Mr. Jones's problem is and why he can't connect to the internet. And so it's a matter of taking the time to perform meaningful engagement. And so that means designing sessions that are both understandable and accessible to folks who don't know what broadband is or aren't as technical. It has activities to help folks really kind of define their own vision for what they want to see in their communities. And it's trickling down. And that's a critical component. We're not just talking to the top layer. We are telling them to invest early on in that bottom-up grassroots approach, because we know from experience, speaking from on high is not going to speak to Mr. Jones.
So you really need to kind of get in there and find out what is really necessary and going to make a difference in a local community. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Sam?
Yes.
Yeah. Tara, what would you add to that about the components and prioritizing the strategies that are necessary to build a digital equity plan?
When I think about the components and that strategy, I do think about assessment. What do we already have? Sometimes we don't have to recreate the wheel. We just have to repair the wheel. So sometimes that's it. How do we enhance that? So maybe there are existing programs there, but we need to figure out how do we enhance those to make them sustainable, to bring about the results that we want. So I will say that here at Michael Baker, we're actually using those assessment tools. We have some first-in-kind assessment inventory tools, and Sam could definitely speak to that as she works on that reporting and all that inventory resourcing. This is the information we need to gather, because we need information in order to give people what it is they actually need. So when I think about that, I think about doing good better. There's a way to do good better. We're not just giving people results based on what we think, but we're giving them results based on what they actually need. And that's how we'll be able to define success in that strategy and in that planning.
Sam, do you just want to add a little bit more on that tool that Tiara just mentioned?
Sure. Referring to the acronym, we call it BITS, which is the Broadband Infrastructure Tracking System.
Okay.
Which is what it sounds like. But it's so critical for the amount of data that needs to be collected and verified and also mapped, so that clients are in control of it, what data collection is occurring. They can monitor project progress and then ultimately report. So we're making sure that this tracking tool, this program management tool, has baked in reporting requirements. So for the funds we're concerned with are right now the BEAD fund and also the capital projects funds are being utilized here. And so these have different processes, different requirements, and different reporting requirements as well. So we're baking those into the system to try and make that compliance easier for clients.
Well, our time is running to an end, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to weigh in on ways that you see the broadband industry evolving over the next 5 to 10 years. And how is this big investment of funds, the BEAD funds, the Digital Equity Act funds, other funds you've just referenced, the capital project funds, and there are others too. States, for example, states have been from 2018 and even earlier and since have really been putting lots of resources into this that will match, supplement, and make this be a much larger project than just the $65 billion in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. But let's hear from Sam and then Tiara, your thoughts on ways that you anticipate the evolution of the industry.
I think I'd just start to say that this is a very energized field. There is a ton of enthusiasm. It's a bipartisan issue. It's uniting folks in a long-standing concern, one that was kind of in the back until the pandemic brought it to the foreground. And so I cannot wait to see the ways that broadband, because it's so interlinked with so many activities in our lives, medical care, education, shopping, all of those things now are completely interconnected with digital resources. And so my theory is that we're going to see outcomes from this intervention that we did not expect in any way, because it's permeating in so many ways. We're going to see downturned communities turned up, finally bridging gaps for resources. And it's, from there, the opportunities are really endless. And so I expect a lot of change. I can't wait to try and measure that change. And it's just a very exciting experience.
Thank you. Tiara, what are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. I definitely see the whole digital equity becoming a household thing. When I think about that, I say, just like, we have other companies that are branded and that's what they're known for. I'd like to say that's definitely what Michael Baker you'll be able to say about Michael Baker. Here's what they're known for. They've come in and they've helped reduce this digital divide, this gap. They've been instrumental in closing it. I just love to see that, because in my mind, I see everybody being able to be connected. Again, it is an essential utility. And I think that people will begin to see that. And I think that's what's going to be blasted at the forefront, that it is essential for everyone to be able to participate on so many levels. Just like Sam said, there's telemedicine, there's education, there's jobs and workforce, all these things. There's so many things, and not even to negate the social aspect of being able to connect socially. And I think that will be expanded. I think the expansion of all of this work will be displayed. I think it'll be on display then, when you'll see that every kid is connected, when you'll see that every child can do homework, when you'll be able to see that everyone's will be able to participate in remote work. You'll be able to see those results of this work that we're doing today 5, 10, 20 years down the line, and then it just evolves from there. And so when I just think about digital equity and where we're going, she's right. It's endless. Where we're going, it's endless. But I think that this pandemic has brought about kind of an exasperation of the need for people to understand how important it is and just how interconnected it is to every single thing we touch on a daily basis.
Well, those are some great and inspiring words for us to conclude on. Thank you for spending time with us, and to our listeners and viewers. We will see you next time. On behalf of Tiara Snerling and Sam Garfinkel, I'm Drew Clark, and it was great to visit with you and learn more about Michael Baker International. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.